Welcome to today's webinar, Apple Ecosystem Management, Getting Started. My name is Nick Thompson, and I will be your host today. Let's take a look at our agenda. First, we're going to do a bit of an overview of Jamf. Since this is really a sort of 101 type of level overview of Jamf and of Apple management in general, I want to make sure everyone's aware of what our products are and what we can do. Then we're going to evaluate some industry trends and really ask, why is this important now? Why are we looking at Apple management in the first place? Then we'll break apart the core tenets of what it means to manage Apple devices in an enterprise. We'll take a look at some of the programs and tools that are available from Apple, as well as taking some look at the basic functionalities of Jamf. And we'll wrap up with some next steps and Q&A. So let's go into our first topic here, just a brief overview of Jamf. For those who aren't familiar with us, this is our tagline. We help organizations succeed with Apple. And we've been doing this now for 15 years, where all we do is focus on Apple device management. And anytime Apple comes out with new products, new operating systems, we support that kind of stuff right away. And we do so with our two products. We have two products called Jamf Now and Jamf Pro. Now is really all about that simple MDM, sort of no IT required, versus Pro is more IT Apple management for the IT pros. And when you look at what it's capable of doing now is really all about that easy setup, simple management, versus Pro is really that complete lifecycle management of Apple devices. For our presentation, we're going to primarily focus on Pro, which we recommend, for really any organization that has above 20 to 50 devices is kind of where you can fit in for Pro. Below that, you might want to take a look at Now. These are some screenshots of what our products look like. It's all online, right? So you access the server all through a web browser, and you execute all of your commands just right there in the browser. And lastly, we help over 10,000 organizations, and we help a lot of the top technology companies out there, a lot of the most valuable brands, top Fortune 500 companies. A lot of schools rely on Jamf, and of course, a lot of the traditional markets where you see Apple devices, like marketing firms, use us. So, just to give you a little bit of sense of who is actually using Jamf to manage Apple devices. So let's take a look now at some industry trends that we are seeing. And I wanted to frame this in here just as context for why you should be considering Apple management in the first place. So we have done a survey. We do this annual survey here, and we just came out with our recent results. This came out in December of 2016, where we conducted the survey in December of 2016. And we ran it through an independent survey company, so we didn't just survey our customers or anything. And we asked, what % of organizations are actually adopting Apple? And we found that 91% of organizations are adopting Mac. 99% are adopting some form of iOS device. So they are really prevalent out there. And on top of that, we see that Apple devices are growing. 74% of those organizations said they saw an increase in Mac adoption, where 76% said they saw an increase of iPhone and iPad adoption. So these devices are coming into our organizations, and we need to figure out why they're coming in and then how to manage them. So we think there's three reasons why Apple is increasing here. And the first one is user choice. This is something that we here at Jamf talk a lot about, is user choice. And we see this being influenced through a number of different ways. This is an interesting survey that PricewaterhouseCoopers did recently about millennials at work. This younger generation who has grown up on technology, a lot of them very familiar with Apple devices, and they're entering the workforce expecting to use stuff that they already know how to use. So they said Almost 60% here, 59% said an employer's providing state-of-the-art technology was important to them when even considering a job. And 78 said that access to the technology that they like to use, that they're most comfortable with, really makes them more effective at work. So this is really a key thing of supporting Apple devices can be key for supporting, to retaining and attracting top talent to your organization. Now, beyond just the PwC's survey here, we also see some evidence from some of these large organizations that are deploying Apple devices. You've maybe recently seen in the news that IBM is deploying a lot of Macs to their employees. In fact, they're now over 100,000 Macs. They happen to use Jamf to manage them, which is pretty cool. And this was done via a choice program that they started back in June of 2015. And they now are the world's largest Mac deployment out there. But what's really interesting about IBM's story here is the number of IBMers that actually want a Mac over a PC. They reported that 73% of IBM employees prefer a Mac over a PC when they have a choice for their next device. And so it's not just in small organizations, it's also in these large organizations too, where we see user choice really driving this. Next, we see increased compatibility. The Mac is able to connect to a standard network. It can work with standard file types. It can connect to a number of standard shared drives. Your printers and your peripherals all just work. And software, of course, is now compatible across Windows and Mac too. You've got Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and Outlook all totally compatible on the Mac. And third, we see that Apple is embracing the enterprise like they've never done before. And you see it with their enterprise partnerships that they've made. With IBM for developing mobile apps, with Cisco for optimizing devices on their network, and with SAP and Deloitte to really transform how back-end business data is handled and presented on mobile devices and on Macs. And we think this trend is really well summarized by a quote that Tim Cook said not too long ago on an earnings call. He said, "I doubt very many people knew that we have a $25 billion enterprise business that we've quietly built in not too many years." So this is a major focus of Apple's, and we see it really growing. So that means you need to manage these devices somehow. And the way that you manage it is by thinking of Apple as an ecosystem. Your Mac plays great with your iPhone, and your iPhone plays great with your Apple Watch and your Apple TV and your iPad. So you need to look at this in a holistic manner. And so what does it look like to go through a life cycle of these devices? What does IT need to be concerned about? Well, we break it down into these steps: deploying the devices out to your users, configuring them with the correct settings, making sure they have the correct software and apps on them so that your users are productive, making sure IT can get inventory data of all of their devices to take action on them, make sure that they are secure to an organization's standards, and providing a unique way for users to get software that they need so they don't always have to submit an IT ticket just to download a piece of software. So we're going to explore these 6 things through the lens of Jamf Pro. And we're going to start off with zero-touch deployments and what this looks like. On the right, you see a Mac with a Post-it note on there. And this is actually how we hand out Macs to new Jamf employees here. There are 3 steps. It just says open up the box, power it on, and there is no step 3. It's really that simple to deploy a Mac nowadays. So I'm going to walk you through what this looks like first from the end user's perspective, and then we're going to explain the technology happening in the background. So here we are booting up our Mac for the first time. I simply select my country and my language, and then I connect it to a network. This could either be Ethernet, or in this case, I'm connecting it to Wi-Fi. And it doesn't have to be your corporate network at this point. It just needs to talk to Apple's activation servers. Because when it talks to Apple's activation servers, it says, hey, this serial number is registered to a company. And I'm going to now present this page. This page is unique, and not many people see this when they're booting up a Mac for the first time because it's usually a consumer Mac. And this says, this device will be configured automatically by, and then you can insert your company's name right there. Now, optionally, I can require my users to authenticate in at this stage. In this case, I am tying back to my AD, my directory services, to require authentication before moving forward, because I don't want just anybody receiving a configuration if they happen to receive a Mac in transit somehow. So I'm adding an additional layer of security here with credentials. And notice they couldn't skip past that screen at all, by the way. They have to accept that configuration. Then I'm creating my normal standard account. And this could be, you have a couple of different controls here as an IT administrator. This could either be a full local admin. It could be just a local standard account, so no admin privileges. Or if you want to have your home accounts live on a directory server, you could skip this altogether and just have it be a mobile account. My Mac's set up, and I'm brought to my home screen like I normally would be, but now I get a push notification right away. And let's zoom in and explore what's actually happening here. So it says, management notification, installing software and security settings, check out SelfService for more resources. What is happening in the background here? Well, there's three pieces of technology. The first is we've wirelessly provisioned this device using Jamf thanks to a technology called DEP. That's the first acronym. Second acronym is we installed some software using something called VPP. And third acronym is we installed some security settings thanks to a technology called MDM. These three are really the core of what it means to manage Apple devices: DEP, VPP, and MDM. We're going to tear apart each of these technologies here. First is Apple's Device Enrollment Program, or DEP. This is what we just saw when we booted up the Mac here for the first time. It is really zero-touch deployment. IT did not have to touch that Mac at all. I could drop ship that Mac to anybody in the world, and as long as they boot it up and it connects to the internet, it's going to automatically enroll itself. Now, you have to buy your devices from Apple or from a reseller that supports this program, and they then link the serial numbers of the devices that you purchased to your account. And again, when you turn it on for the first time, it automatically enrolls itself. Apple even lets you bring these enrolled devices that have been purchased back to March of 2011, as long as you can essentially prove that serial number to who you bought it through, Apple or your resellers. And this also works with iOS devices. So I'm going to show you what that same setup process looks like for iOS here. Very similar. It boots up again for the first time, enters that familiar setup assistant. We connect it again to a wireless network so that it can talk to Apple's activation servers. And again, it is flagged then for enrollment because it's checking that serial number with Apple's database. Again, I can't skip past that screen. That requires that configuration be installed on my device. I can even skip some of those normal setup screens that we see, like Apple ID and location, all that. And now the iPad is ready for management. Now, as a side note here, if your organization is not supported with DEP, or some countries don't support DEP also, or if you just have older devices that you got through other means, there are two other methods for enrolling devices to make sure that they can be managed. And that would be either going through some of the older imaging workflows, or enrolling it via a URL, which we see on the right here, where a user just navigates to a preset URL and they enroll their device. So let's go back to our Mac. We're going to zoom back out now here, and let's open up System Preferences, and we can see something. We see that something called an MDM profile has been installed on our device, and a whole bunch of other settings. These are other configurations that we can do now to this Mac. So let's go back to our workflow here. We've deployed the devices. Now we want to configure them with the right settings. This is Mobile Device Management, or MDM. And MDM is the built-in management framework to all of Apple's operating systems. Mac OS, iOS, and now even tvOS has MDM built into it. And the way it works is you build these little profiles, and these profiles define various settings inside of the operating system. It tells the device how to behave. It's almost like a recipe. These profiles are delivered over the air to your devices, all thanks to Apple's push notification service. This service maintains a constant connection to your devices, so you don't have to. You don't have to worry about IP changes or anything like that. It is always maintaining a constant connection to your devices. And what are these files? Well, these files are just little XML files, and you build them using Jamf. And the full name for them are called configuration profiles. So that's what MDM is, the built-in management framework. So what can you do with these profiles? Well, here are some examples of payloads that you can build into these profiles. And I've grouped them in kind of logical orders here. So here are some of the basics like passcode settings, various restrictions that you want to put on a device, defining what networks the device can join, pre-configuring VPN for them, pre-setting up your accounts, mail account, exchange account, calendar accounts, applying various security settings, and some more advanced things too. Now, these profiles can work on all Apple devices. Now, not some of them, right? Like you can't apply a Finder payload to an iOS device, but the basics are the same. And so what that means is really you end up with configurations for the entire Apple ecosystem, from Apple TV to iPhone to the Mac to iPad. And they are consistent across all of your devices. But I want to focus in on the Mac here for a minute because, MDM is great for mobile and for tvOS, but sometimes you need a little bit more on the Mac. And organizations want to do just a little bit more. They want to modify accounts. They want to do terminal commands. They want to do scripts, things like that. And so that's why we also have an agent that gets installed on the Mac. This agent is really just a binary that gets automatically installed after MDM enrollment. And it lets you as the administrator add a hidden admin account. Now, why would you want to add a hidden admin account to your Mac? Well, it's because it enables you to get remote root access to your client devices, to your Mac OS devices. And since you would have remote root access, that lets you do so much more. It lets you execute various policies, run scripts, install software, and much, much more. Here's a subset of what you can do with that agent installed on your Macs. You can install PKG files, enforce file vault, bind your Macs to a directory, execute scripts. If you don't know what command it is, but you know how to do it in terminal, you can bake that into a script and push it out to all of your Macs. Set a firmware password, modify account settings. So that means you could remove admin access from your users, or better yet, grant them admin access, but that's up to you. And a lot more here. So the summary here on the Mac side of things is that Jamf offers both MDM and this agent for really total Mac configuration. So moving on, we've deployed our devices. We've got configurations on them. Now we need to get software on them as well too. And so first we're going to look to Apple's Volume Purchase Program. That's VPP. That's our third acronym here. And VPP lets us license Mac and iOS apps from the app stores, and we can distribute them to either individual users or we can distribute them directly to the device. And if we distribute them to the device, that means they don't have to have an Apple ID at all. This is a really big deal for IT where you don't have to deal with Apple ID management really at all. You can deploy these apps directly to the device and not have to worry about Apple IDs at all. And this is a free program, again, from Apple. You just simply have to sign up and then you license apps depending on whatever the cost of those apps are. Now, just another side note here. If you're a school, you may have heard of something called Apple School Manager. Apple School Manager is really the combination of DEP and VPP in just one portal. So what does this look like with iOS for deploying apps? Well, I've got this scenario here where I've got an iPad that's fairly locked down. I've actually disabled the App Store altogether. And instead, I want my users to get apps through our SelfService app catalog. And I've populated this with all of our pre-approved apps. A user just simply selects what they want, and that triggers the automatic install of that app. No Apple ID was ever required there. And so you can do some really powerful stuff with iOS, just pushing apps or allowing users to pull apps down without requiring an Apple ID at all. Now, on the Mac has a lot of software out there that's not in the Mac App Store, namely Photoshop and namely Microsoft Office. So you need another method of deploying software, and that's what our agent is able to do. With Jamf Pro, you can take snapshots of a software install. So you can customize it however you'd like, take a snapshot of it, and that creates a custom PKG file for you. You can then take that PKG file and push it out via the Jamf agent to all of your Macs so that they all have Microsoft Office, and just your marketing department has Adobe Creative Suite, and just your finance department has whatever finance app that they need to use. So you can get really creative with how you take snapshots of that software and how you scope it to the users that you want them to have it. Next, we're going to gather some inventory data on our devices here. And this is a snapshot, or this is a screenshot of some of the inventory data that we can gather. So we get a lot of information about when the device last checked in, the IP address, what user we have this assigned to in the system. We get a lot of information about the hardware itself, the device, serial number, the UDID, the processor, RAM, free hard drive space, all that. It tells us all the info that we could ever want to know about the operating system and the software that's installed on there. And we can even pull app usage logs. So when we get requests from people that say, oh, I need the next version of Adobe Photoshop, maybe I could evaluate if they're actually using Photoshop all the time or not. So we get a lot of detailed information. And what do we do with that detailed information? Well, we want to be able to apply profiles and policies to various groups of devices. So the first way that I can group devices here is on the left with what we call static groups. I am simply just numbering devices. I'm saying these set devices are in a group, and now I am going to apply a policy or profile to them. This could represent like your marketing department all gets Adobe Photoshop, or this could represent like a Mac lab all gets these specific settings. A smart group, on the other hand, is dynamic. We're searching for a string here. We're searching for criteria. We're saying, find all my Macs that have 8 gigs of RAM and 80% hard drives full and running the latest operating system. And it's dynamically looking for any Mac that fits into that set of criteria that you define. And then it is automatically applying a policy or a profile to there. So imagine you could say, set up a smart group that says, show me all Macs that are not encrypted. And if they're not encrypted, automatically apply the file vault encryption policy to them. So if any Mac ever falls out of policy, it's automatically being added to this group and then having a policy trigger on top of there. So you can get very advanced with the sort of groups and policies that you do. Next, I want to look at our security controls that you can do. So on the Mac side of things, there are a couple of MDM commands that you can send down to a device. If a Mac is lost, I can lock it, or I could wipe it altogether. Or if I am retiring this Mac, I could remove MDM management framework from it. On the iOS side of things, we have a few other commands that we can do. Again, we can lock it or wipe it, but we could also clear the password. We could set the wallpaper. We could put an iOS device in lost mode. And now we can even shut down or restart an iOS device, all using these various commands, MDM commands. Of course, we want to also enforce various policies that we build either through configuration profiles or through agent policies. Here, I want to walk you through just a few. So here are some things that you could do. You can apply a password policy. I can restrict certain things in system preferences. Maybe I don't want my users going into the Users and Groups tab or the Date and Time tab. Maybe I want to restrict some of the consumer features that are on both Mac and iOS. I don't want them to using the camera, maybe. Or I want to disable Apple Music, or I want to disable iCloud. All things that you can do. On the Mac, again, I could also enforce gatekeeper settings. So this is Apple's way of detecting malware and determining where users can get software from. And a very popular one, of course, too, is enforcing file vault encryption. We can even take the encryption keys and store them all in a central server. You can also restrict apps, both on the iOS side and on the Mac side. You can restrict apps. So I'm looking at the Mac side here, where it's actually finding and killing a specific process and then deleting that app altogether. On the iOS side of things, I can just blacklist apps from the App Store as well. Last, I want to look at self-service. So the idea of an app catalog is really this idea of tier 0 support. I want my users to be able to get the things that they need without having to bug IT all the time. So if we go back to our Mac here, we looked at how we provision this thing using DEP. We looked at how we installed software using VPP, and we also installed some software using the Jamf agent. And we looked at how we applied some settings, both using MDM and the Jamf agent as well, too. But in that second sentence, we said, check out self-service for more resources. As we zoom back out now to our Mac and launch self-service, this is what it is. It's an app catalog that you as IT can populate with anything that you would like to be in here, whether that is an app or a script or printer settings. Whatever is most appropriate for your users, you can populate it in here. You'll soon even be able to skin this to make it look like your company's branding. It doesn't have to look like Jamf branding or anything like that. So you could brand it to your company's specifications. And of course, we've got self-service for mobile as well too, both on iPhone and on iPad. Let's recap here. We looked at Jamf Pro, and we looked at the lifecycle management of Apple devices, both Mac, iOS, and even tvOS, about how you can deploy them using DEP in a zero-touch scenario. You can then configure them using both MDM and the Jamf agent. You can get the correct apps that you want on there using VPP and using the Jamf agent to install apps outside of the app stores. We looked at how we can gather extensive inventory data and take action on that inventory data by creating static groups and dynamic smart groups. And we looked at some examples of security controls that you can apply as well too, and that self-service app catalog. Some quick tech specs here for you. Jamf Pro can be either hosted in the cloud or on-premise. We see a lot of folks going with a cloud-hosted version here. We've got data centers in North America and EU, and we use AWS as our infrastructure. The on-prem server, very lightweight. You can virtualize it if you want to. Linux, Windows, or Mac OS server is supported. It's really just a MySQL database talking to a Tomcat server. Just a few gigs of RAM and some hard drive space is really all you need there. And again, we looked at the Apple programs that we support, from DEP and VPP to some of the underlining technologies like APNS, which is that push notification service for maintaining connection between our devices. And if you're a school, Apple School Manager, which is really just a combination of DEP and VPP. And lastly, we also do support a lot of other third-party integrations here. So if you have AD in your environment, we integrate with that. If you have single sign-on, we integrate with that. You can share inventory data with SCCM. If you've got Cisco networks, we support Cisco ICE and their new Fastlane for mobile devices. And we've got a great plugin for ServiceNow. And if you got other things too, we've got a full API that you could customize to your heart's desire. Let me wrap up here with some next steps. If you're interested in this at all, check out our website, reach out to us. We've got sales and engineer folks ready to talk to you all about how this works in your environment. We've got a ton of other webinars that you can check out if you want to get more technical. And join the conversation online. Jamf Nation is our free community forum where we have 40,000 IT members that talk about their best practices for managing Apple devices. And of course, it goes beyond just Jamf, of course, too here. Thanks, everybody, and that will conclude our presentation. Take care.